Yeah. If it's Sunday morning, there's a good chance, not guarantee, but a good chance, it's Nurch Day. Every other Sunday, you will find the Unholy Trinity here broadcasting to you live from 3 locations, or 1 location. Hey, 3 in 1, right? We're in 3 locations, but we're all here. It's the Unholy Trinity. I'm glad you guys are here.
Church.
Yeah.
On your way to church, instead of listening to Kirk, you should be listening to Nurch.
Always good to hear the other side of the conversation. So
Absolutely.
you're about to go let somebody tell you what thus says the Lord. Listen to some folks tell you, here's what thus says people in the name of the Lord.
That's right.
You can juxtapose the two.
Yeah.
Come on into the chat.
I feel like they say that the KJV was dated sounding when it was actually released. So I feel like the distance that people have between it and the way they use language on a regular basis, it adds to the otherworldliness of it.
For sure.
Maybe that's part of the appeal, you know?
Yeah.
Like when you say "thus says the Lord," you know, even that phrasing, it feels like, oh, this is coming from someone important, just
because it's coming from something uncommon.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know what they say, right? They
Holy,
say
right?
familiarity breeds contempt.
Right.
So the more familiar you are with something, the more it just seems like, oh, it's run of the mill. You start talking in King James language, it's like, oh, that must be other.
Right.
Yep.
Let a pastor pull out a Greek word in the middle of the sermon, and in Greek it means, you know, you're blown away by the otherness of
Yeah,
it.
and it parallels our readily available credulity for stories about people walking on water too. Because if I said, oh yeah, there was a guy at the lake yesterday where I live walking on the water, people would immediately find that to be something that's unbelievable. But you separate them by a couple hundred years, maybe even over 1,000, and suddenly
Right.
it seems. But the same person who accepts that by virtue of it being separated by like 1,000 years, a millennium, will at the same time say they don't think that time makes evolution more believable. Have you ever heard this argument, like where people say evolution takes? Go ahead. What are you saying?
No, I get you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Often they'll be like, does it make it more probable that it would happen because of all the millions of years? And in some sense, it does, for sure. But
because you're so removed from it, you're like you said, your credulity goes down because you're so removed from it. You don't feel like you have the wherewithal to even contest it because it was far, far away and long, long ago.
Right. Yeah. So if the language puts an additional kind of distance between you, but if it becomes more pedestrian and it's in a modern translation, sometimes the absurdity shows up more clearly in the translations that are trying to be more contemporaneous, you know?
Right.
Or I should say contemporary. Contemporary is the word for that, you know? They're trying to give me a new rendering of this passage, devoid of all of the old English. Suddenly it just like doesn't smack like it used to.
Yeah.
It's different, you know?
It makes me think of Dinesh D'Souza. He had a debate with Alex O'Connor a few weeks ago, actually. And Alex came in, Cosmic Skeptic, formerly known as Cosmic Skeptic, came in, did his opening address. And then when it was Dinesh D'Souza's turn, they were, first of all, they were both sitting in like armchairs, and Alex spoke from his armchair. Dinesh D'Souza, when it was his turn, he stood up. And you're like, why are you standing up? Are you trying to base Alex O'Connor? Like, why are you standing up? And he literally says the quiet part out loud. He says, I'm going to stand because I think Alex's English accent does more for him than you all think. So because His English accent is buying him credibility, and it's making you guys buy into what he's saying. I'm going to change my posture and stand so that I can kind of counteract or balance out his accent. So that just goes to show you.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like, even in our parlance today, we understand that the otherness of an accent can do something for somebody's message. How much more reading the Bible in King James or, some other kind of vernacular makes you feel like, oh, there's some awe to it.
So apparently when the King James was published, I didn't know this until recently, that the English was already out of date. So
yeah, that's what I said at the top. Yeah.
Oh, you did say that. Okay, you did say that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was already otherized.
It was already
when
otherized.
They released it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's wild.
All right. Well, we are here not to talk about rules of English grammar and the changing times and dialect, but in a sense, we are going to cover some of that as we dive into Romans chapter 11. If you were with us on Tuesday for Exit Strategy, I don't know why I said Romans 10. We already covered Romans 10. We're in Romans 11 this week. And I'm pretty sure, unless I get much protest, what we're going to do is, after today, the next time we do Romans, we're going to sum up chapters 12 through 15 in one episode. So, now maybe I'm misremembering because I haven't read those chapters since I was a believer years ago. Maybe there's more to it than I remember, but I think we're going to be able to just breeze through those when we get to it 2 weeks from now. I want to read a couple comments from last. This is from Exit Strategy, where we talked about the nothingness of God. C. Despejo, CDESPEJO. I don't know how to say your name. Says, good stuff. Loved the discussion about falsifiability and the absence of God. Unknown X7252 says, I'm from Haiti. My mom used to tell me stories of mermaids. And if you guys watch that episode, you know what that's about. David DeBoe says, 100% with you on the need for God to be experimentally present at all times, as we're promised he will be in heaven, to overcome our capacity for doubt. If he appeared to me today, as you said, I would absolutely be questioning that experience within a matter of hours. Just do it, God! ! Just show up and remain in view. Be a present reality. Now, somebody could say, well, I don't need my husband, my wife, my kids, my friends to always remain in view to believe that they are. Well, yeah, that's because they're part of the natural world. And in the natural world, we have something called object permanence. Little kids, when you hide their eyes, if they're toddlers, they have not yet learned the principle of object permanence. So if you hide their eyes, if you do peekaboo, I see you, they're not yet aware that just because they're not looking at you, you're still there because of object permanence. But we also have object distance. So when an object moves, you may not see it, but it's still around. That's part of the natural world. We don't know what kind of rules the supernatural plays by. So it could be a out of sight, out of existence kind of thing with the supernatural. This is why the idea of until God interacts with the natural world in a natural way, you really have no way to substantiate God's being. So that's what that conversation was. Any trailing thoughts on that before we move on, fellas?
No.
I
think you said it well.
Yeah.
All right. So we are in Romans chapter 11. But before we do that, let's just take a look back at Romans chapter 10 to see where we've been. So Romans chapter 10, you have Paul basically, I tried to suggest that what Paul was doing this music always kills me. Paul was looking back at the Hebrew scriptures and finding that, you know what? God often does use Gentiles to get Israel in line. So why don't we just press the gas on that and go a little bit further and make the Gentiles part of God's overall plan for Israel. Rather than God trying to get Israel back on top of the Gentiles, no, God's going to incorporate the Gentiles into this thing, because if you look, he's always been doing that. And we saw Paul misquoting passages from Isaiah, passages from Deuteronomy, to try to make it look like God was always going to do this. God was always going to do something where the Gentiles were involved in Israel's salvation. Today, we're going to continue that theme, because Paul is going to try to save Israel from the peril that he just put Israel in. If God's going to use Gentiles, and God's saving Gentiles, and God's plan was to always incorporate Gentiles, what does that mean for Israel? Is Israel now going to be lost? And I don't plan to do as much jumping around through the Old Testament as we did last week, but I do have two passages from the Old Testament that I want to peer into. I don't know if you all, when you guys read it, if you felt like you're going to want to spend a lot of time in the Old Testament this week. How about, I don't know, where were you guys with that as far as going back to the old stance?
Well, I thought we would do at least a good takedown, right? In the first 10 verses at least.
Okay.
Right? But no, but he's then he's kind of gets into, lots of ideas where, you can actually spar with it without, having to kind of call back too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Jay Witt.
I have a concept that I'd like to kind of dig into based on Old Testament. Well, perhaps it refers to a lot of Old Testament passages, but
Okay.
I don't want to actually directly go to each Old Testament passage. It's more conceptual, but we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Let's more, yeah.
All good. All right, I'm going to share my screen so we can see. First, let me pull it up here. Not that one. I want this one. All right, Romans 11 is on screen. You guys will see it in a matter of seconds. All right. Oh, you know what? I wanted to share. Do we have time? I want to share something else first before we go to this scripture. I saw somebody post this on Facebook, and I just thought worth a conversation. The picture's worth 1,000 words. Let's see if we could put at least 500 words to this.
Tears, yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we're waiting for you to direct us as to how.
What emotions, what thoughts, can you relate? Would you critique? Whatever.
Well, I mean, obviously, I don't have the interpretive power of the Holy Spirit, which would be required to take these and translate them into, translate the groans that can't be uttered into, actual words.
Nice.
I mean, sometimes it's like, what's the use of any utterance at all if God knows all your thoughts, right? Why even write "Dear God" and "Amen"? Just have the tears flowing.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah.
How about that? It does sort of betray. We talked about language a minute ago. It does sort of betray the use or the illogical nature of praying. Your Heavenly Father knows what you have need of before you ask. The Holy Spirit, intercedes for us with groans. Why pray then? Like, what is the point? Why do you need language for a God who, like, it almost makes prayer performative. Like, there's a performative nature to you having to say things that you don't need to say. are you saying them for the sake of other people? Why are you saying anything at all?
Mhm.
Yeah, this reminds
Nope.
me of when I was when I was a teenager, and we would also talk about, oh, this person was such a great, godly person because they spend 3 hours.
Hmm.
They come to church 6 in the morning and like on a weekday for these prayer meetings, and
Hmm.
they, like they boast in how people
Hmm.
are doing that performative act. Um, when it really and it oddly contradicts Jesus's words, right? In a way too. So at the same
Hmm.
time, but it's easy. Like that's like an easy dig, right? It's
Hmm.
like you can have a prophet come by and say, "Yeah, what are you guys all doing? You're supposed to go into a closet and pray." I
Yeah.
mean, it's not really that insightful at all. So yeah,
Yeah. I don't,
yeah.
but just this weekend, my nephew stayed over at my house, and he typically sleeps in the room that we're in right now.
Mm.
And my plan was to get the bed out of this room, to put my podcast stuff in this room that we're in now, which we did. But before we did that, he had slept in the room that night, the night before. And so in the morning, he came down for breakfast. I said, "Hey, did you make the bed up?" He went upstairs to make the bed. Then he came back down and said, Uncle Brady, is there any point in making the bed if we're about to take the bed out of that room anyway? Like why should I make the bed? And I said, you know what? That's a good point. But then he walked away. I said, hold on, do it just for practice. Like just make the bed for practice. But in my mind, I'm like, yeah, why should he make the bed? No one's going to sleep in it anymore. We don't need that. In the same way, I know like even before I was deconstructing and deconverting, the reason I struggled in prayer was because I was almost like, is there a point in saying the things that God already knows? Am I doing it just for practice? Am I making the bed just for practice? Because he already knows what I'm going, and I struggle with doing it,
But
knowing.
Brady, he wants you to come to him as a child and ask him.
Yeah.
He wants you to humble
It,
yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up, Brady.
yeah.
This is my version of mealy mouth Christian talk
No,
rhetoric.
but I mean, and I would sometimes, I would, but even as I did it, I still struggled with, but you already know this.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
like
You know this,
why am
man.
I doing yeah, why am I doing this?
The thing is sometimes when you hear Jay Witt ask a question and you know why he's asking it, you can't see his face. You can't see the expression he's making
Right.
when he's asking
Yeah.
you that
Well,
question.
there's a comment that I skipped over. There's a comment that I skipped over because
Just take it easy.
some somebody made a comment on last week's exit
Um,
strategy, basically getting on Jay Witt for asking a question that he should have known the answer to, or not agreeing with me when I was saying something. And I'm like, well, you don't understand why Jay Witt was saying what he was saying. So
mm.
Albert, to your point, yeah,
Yeah,
it's easy to miss where he's coming from and the points that he may be
yeah.
trying to drive at. One last thing about this, dear God, amen. The tears as prayers. I think a lot of times, we said this last week or last Nurch, evangelical Christians especially don't understand that it's not just the Psalms that qualify as the tearful prayers of Israel. When you read the Psalms, you think, oh yeah, David was angry at God, and it's okay to emote with God. It's okay to cry. It's okay to ask God, where is he? It's not just the Psalms that are doing that. It's the prophets. It's the historical books. All of those are an ancient people's way of, dear God, teardrop, 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 amen. So when you read the Old Testament, you're not reading history. You're not reading prophecy. You're not reading just poetry. You're reading a people group trying to figure out, how do we make sense of an absent God, yet all these claims of his fame and these calls to worship him. Why would you worship a God who's allowing you to go through all this? Well, the books that you're reading are the teardrop prayers of people trying to put words together to make sense of their reality. And so,
Another way of putting that is, how do we make everything about us.
Say
Because
more.
if you think about at the heart of ideology is this desire to justify one's own existence. And that's the heart of it. It's saying, hey, how am I victorious? You know, how am I not the loser? Well, what's another way of wording that? How is this about me winning? So you can say
Good point.
The negative way is say how am I the loser? But you say it positively is how is this about me winning? And what's a more a broader way of even stating that? How is this about me? Is the third tier of that? How is this about me?
Yeah.
And if you really think about it, it's a very self-centered, it's a solipsistic, it's a narcissistic way of viewing the world. And we're going to deep dive into the heart of that in Romans 11.
Yeah. Well, if I can add to that,
into the heart.
If I could add to that, here's how you know what Jay Witt just said is actually the case. Because many different people groups have their own ideology. The way that, you know, all the ancients thought that the sky was a solid dome. But if you go to each group, they're going to tell you how that dome came into existence. And it's all going to be stories about them. And so when this group's ideology bumps up against this group's ideology, wait, why do you guys think there's a sky dome? Wait, because that reason that you guys came up with doesn't envision us in the story. So that can't be the reason. Well, the reason that you guys came up with for the rainbow doesn't envision us. Well, the reason you guys came up with for why snakes crawl doesn't envision us. Every group's ideology has them in mind. The story is about us. It's explaining our reality to ourselves. Then when you run into a different group, their ideology is explaining them to themselves. So you end up saying, okay, well then clearly all these stories can't be true. What is true is all of us were trying to figure out something about ourselves. So you end up, as Jay Witt said, realizing how self-centered, even if the self is our group, our people group, how self-centered ideology really is. And yes, we are going to see that in Romans 11.
There's an example of that that's unique to America, and those who've studied a little history will know it was known under the phrase or the term manifest destiny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They bought in. I won't say more about that. I'll just leave it there. But if you guys care to share a little about it, that's fine.
Well, I wasn't thinking about manifest destiny, but I was just thinking also about how we've created mythologies around founding fathers. As simple as that.
Yeah.
You know. So
yeah.
Well, and then even
destiny. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and then I was just going to say, like, even around how even the Constitution was built or devised, like we've actually created some myths around that as well.
Legends.
And yeah, and then when you always read back into, because you know people like to talk about the Constitution as this kind of it's almost like this like canonical document, right? Where it's more or less been somewhat inspired by God, whatever. But you read how it was essentially put together. I mean, there was huge debate. It's a really messy history in terms of, you know, like there was no sense of like, oh, this literally how is it like this is what a Christian or a country, I should say, how it should be run or how it should be how a government should be devised. Like these concepts were in huge debate. Like there was no the amount of certainty we put into it it's just not there historically at all. So yeah, Jay Wood, you wanted to finish your thought about manifest?
Well, no, I don't need just for the listening audience, go check out Manifest Destiny. You'll see that we had our founding myths about you know how obvious it was that we were to conquer going westward, and that's basically the American Empire, but also the Aztec peoples. They had was it a Quetzalcoatl or something like that? It was a feathered serpent god who had. There was a prophecy that white conquerors would come, and that was their explanation. That when the conquistadors came over, they used that. They said this was the prophecy because the Aztec god had supposedly prophesied that these people would come. What's going on there? It's centering them on the world stage.
Now let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question because this is very interesting. Are you saying that there actually was a prophecy that even before Columbus and others came to the quote unquote new world, that this prophecy existed? Or are you saying they sort of wrote this prophecy and made it look like it was written beforehand, but it was really written after to explain what happened?
From what I'm not an expert on Aztec culture, but I did, a little, I won't say a deep dive, but some years ago I looked at I was kind of into that because I was just researching colonialism in general. And yeah, this Quetzalcoatl's prophecy came up. Yeah, I guess apparently there was some sort of prophecy at some point that there were going to be some conqueror coming.
Right.
I think white was particularized in the sense that they would be white or something. Now, what that meant may have not meant like white as what we think of as white as a race.
Okay.
Obviously, when these people came along, all you got to do is look it up. Look it up on the internet. It's
well, the reason I ask is because as we get into this text today, what most literary, historical, critical scholars would say is when you see these prophecies in the Old Testament about Israel being taken into captivity and all these things, they were not written beforehand and fulfilled. The captivity happened as part of history, and then people later on wrote about them and made it look like it was written beforehand to give God the credit and give God the glory, as if, see, our God was not caught off guard. He already knew it. And I'm just wondering if what you're saying with the Aztecs is similar or dissimilar to that. So that's the only reason why I asked. But okay, let's dive into Romans 11, and you guys will see why that even matters in the first place. And as Albert said, you'll see it very early on as to why that matters.
Perhaps we should solicit the audience to jump in the comments if they know a little more about this than I do, because I just mentioned it casually.
Well, I'm sure somebody can just Google it, and they could take the time to Google it. But rather than have you guys Google while we're doing this, unless you know, let's dive in.
You gotta listen to the sermon.
You know what? I wonder to what degree, this is a very sidebar, if I was still in church, like think about how much of a Google that culture we become. I wonder how many people sit in church today Googling the sermon away, because there's so much information online. You got Dan McClellan's and you got just all kinds of stuff that now when your pastor's up there preaching, rather than just think about how this changes culture, because you used to sit there as a sitting duck and just take whatever's coming from the pulpit. But now you can slip down in your pew and Google different views on that, or Google how historical was that, and so it sort of takes your attention away from what's being said. So you're not as
you can fact check.
You can fact check in real time. Remember, Donald Trump didn't want to do the debate because he was going to be fact checked in real time. Well, imagine being able to fact check sermons in real time. Like, I wonder.
No, you're saying it's wrong. You're saying it's wrong, Brady. Okay. It's not being able to because they can.
Right.
Imagine doing it.
Right. Exactly.
Imagine actually using your superpower.
Exactly.
And doing it.
Yeah. Just imagine how many emails pastors get now. Saying, "Hey, you said this. You said that."
It's got to be a nightmare. Yeah. It's got to be a nightmare. Hey, I was Googling and I found that the fact that you gave. I would be so nervous, right? Like having to get up in front of people, and you got McClellan giving them information, and then they're coming back. Hey, what do you say about this?
Oh my! So
is it true? Is it true that there are multiple authors for Isaiah? Like, are you serious?
We're going to revisit this on Exit Strategy. We have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it plays right into the conversation we had about the ego of preaching. So. We got to come back to that. Let's dive in. I'm going to share the screen. Um, Romans 11. Share screen. Here's screen. Blammo. All right, if you guys don't mind, I'm going to read the first 6 verses, and then we can go back through and dissect however we want to dissect.
Mhm.
I ask then, has God rejected his people? So, all right, never mind. I'm going to keep reading. By no means. I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Do you not know what the scripture says of Elijah? How he pleaded with God against Israel? Lord, they have killed thy prophets. They have demolished thy altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my life. But what is God's reply to him? I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So too, at the present time, there is a remnant chosen by grace. But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace would no longer be grace. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word.
I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm like with the old videos of Tyson coming out after the bell rings, I'm just charging. I'm ready to go. Ready to go, man.
All right.
No,
So,
we're all Buster Keaton, man.
So
Or
just
not-
so you
not-
guys
not
know,
Buster Keaton,
just
Buster
so you-
Davis.
Buster Douglas.
Douglas, there you go. Yeah.
just so you guys know, we have not discussed this passage. When you see us get together on Nurch days, we have not discussed these passages. All of us read them on our own, and we're coming to the table to share and share alike. So go ahead, Jay Witt, since you're ready, just dive in.
Yeah, I have received of the Lord that which I have delivered unto you. Come on here. All right. No, but no, seriously, when I got down to the bottom of verse 6, immediately I sensed a swapping or switching out. And I wanted to bring it to the session, to the other elders. Because this verse, but if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace would no longer be grace. That statement, it assumes that there's consensus, that there's agreement in the audience on the definition of grace and how that has to be worked out if it's going to be utilized, and how that is the concept of grace is going to have to be worked out. How do we define it? By Paul's standard, if it's of grace, it cannot be of works. And you know that he's hot linking back to an earlier conversation in the book where he's trying to link works and faith to salvation. And so what he's trying to make you aware of is that grace necessitates that it doesn't have any works as a basis for it being given, right? But the question is, biblically, is that the case? Has that always been the case? Or is it so all my life I assumed that grace was this? I assumed that, so they gave me a definition, grace being unmerited favor, and I accepted it. I never asked, was that presented in the text before? So the first question, I have some passages in mind, but the first question I have is, when you guys saw that, did you guys think and question his presentation of grace here? Did you think about it and say, what's the basis for him making that claim and assuming there is consensus in terms of agreement with him and his audience, his listening audience, reading audience?
I didn't. I had other thoughts, but not about whether or not there was agreement. Maybe like you, I just assumed that grace was the grace that I always knew grace to be, unmerited favor.
You, Albert?
I mean, he's referencing, he's interpreting the events or the passage he's saying as, by talking about a remnant, right? So when you to me, always associated remnant and grace to be hotly linked in this sense. Reading this now, however, I think I'm seeing things a little differently.
Well, so, can I stop you for a second? Because I was fighting it. I'm just show you guys how good a job I did. I was fighting my OCD because Jay Witt jumped to verse 6. I'm like, yo, we didn't do verses 1 through 5. And so I did a good job fighting my OCD and letting it rock the way it was rocking. But because Albert just hot linked back to the remnant idea, can we go through 1 through 5 and then deep dive into 6? Because I think it will make 6 sing all the more if we do 1 through 5 and then get there.
But
okay.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So verse 1 already. Has God rejected his people? This is to me an admission that what he's said could literally be taken that way. For anybody who struggled with the last Nurch episode when I titled it Paul's Anti-Semitic Gospel, and I didn't really hit on why the inclusion of the Gentiles could be seen as anti-Semitic. But I think verse 1 of chapter 11 shows you why I could say that. Paul understands that what he said in chapter 10 could make it look like the gospel is turning away from the Jews. So he's got to spend chapter 11 explaining how that's not the case. I ask then, has God rejected his people? He's asking this because he knows the readers are now worried that that might be the case. He's assuring them, by no means, hey, look, I'm an Israelite, descendant of Abraham, member of the tribe of Benjamin. Now, there could be all kinds of questions. There's some people who think that Paul is a Roman plant, not a Jew, somebody pretending to be a Jew to get the Jews into a more Gentile view of looking at the world. But at least here you have him claiming to be an actual Jew. Verse 2, God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. And I wanted to title this episode, The Problem of God's Foreknowledge. Why? Because Paul's going to do things here in this chapter. This is ideology. Ideology is, I have to explain why our history looks the way it looks. It looks terrible. If our God is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, all the things that we said he is, all these omnis, and if, like Jay Witt said, if we're God's favored people, not favorite, favored people, then why does our life and legacy look like this? Well, I can't let it be because God is weak. I've got to find some kind of way to this is theodicy, right? To justify God's goodness. Oh, God foreknew that this would all happen. There's a problem when you make all of this the result of God's foreknowledge. But he says in verse 2, God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Do you not know what the scripture says of Elijah? This gets into the point Al just brought up about the remnant. How Elijah pleads with God against Israel. So Elijah's bringing claims against Israel. Lord, they've killed all your prophets. They demolished the altars. I'm the only one left. And they seek my life even. I want to ask, when you guys read this, did you have any thoughts about even the story of Elijah? Because I'm going to tell you, when I read this morning, I thought, what was the writer? Was that Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, we hear about Elijah? What was the writer trying to do by telling this story about Elijah and these prophets? And one of the things that I will suggest, I've heard others make this point as well, Yahweh is being retrojected back onto Israel's history. The name of the people is Israel. El is a Canaanite god. So even the people themselves are a people of a Canaanite descendancy, and El was their god. The question becomes, how does Yahweh become the God of El's people? And so what they'll say is, when you start reading certain passages in Deuteronomy and Isaiah, what you see is a later generation trying to rewrite their history to make it look like Yahweh was always supposed to be the God of Israel. Yahweh was always supposed to have the place that El had in the life of Israel. And so they write the story in such a way as to make it look like Yahweh was always our God, but the people, the Israelites, killed the prophets of Yahweh, and only Elijah was left. So they write this battle into the history books to make the current generation feel like that's why we're in the situation we're in. We should have always been Yahweh's people, not the people of El. So even this idea about a remnant is based on an ideology of trying to sneak El into Israel. Trying to sneak Yahweh into Israel's history. But then you have this verse that, go ahead.
Now, I was going to just say, just so that people can understand this in a contemporary way, this idea isn't foreign to us, rewriting our history. Florida was banning history books that explicitly mentioned things about slavery right here in America. Why?
Florida and
the question
Texas.
is why? Exactly. So the question becomes, whenever a person is trying to amend or change the history, there is a rationale, there is a motive behind it. And what Brady is presenting our audience with today is saying, in this case, it's an ideology. They're attempting to work. So they know they have to contend with El because El is their existent reality. Their very name contains a partial, more than an allusion to El. El is in their name.
Right.
Israel,
the truth of the history can't be hidden.
It can't be hidden. And so this is a principle that is necessary to understand when you're looking at Genesis and you're looking at passages of the book that seem to have conflicting story. At some point, people say, oh, why would they put a chapter that contradicts a chapter preceding a chapter that's a contradiction to the later chapter? Well, there are some things that are historical that are undeniable. So the best way you can do a revision of history is to incorporate some portion. They say most good lies have a portion of truth in them. You have to incorporate the truth of the matter into your lie so that your lie becomes more plausible. That's why often you'll see the believable lies. It's essentially, I just got this analogy just now. AI, when they took the AI and they manipulated Sonia Massey's video, that's the prime example of taking something that's truthful, a video that exists that we all had seen, and you take AI and you manipulate it, you insert the lie into it. Now we can't tell which one was the truth or which one's the lie. Like if they just tried to replace the video with a totally different video, maybe we would reject it. We say, well, that's different from what we already saw. But the fact that the lie was worked into something that's already extant, something that we know exists, now it becomes more believable. How do you make the acceptance of Yahweh a thing that is more plausible for people? Well, you got to work him into the story. How do you work him into the story? You turn him into a minority group. He's being stamped out by persecution, essentially, right? That's what you're saying, essentially.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we could chase that, unless Al has any comments. I was saying all that to build to the point that Al was getting to. Can I just jump to that point? Al, do you have any comments?
Yeah, let's do it. No, I'm good. Let's keep going.
That's a great way to sum it up, Joey. I want to move to the point I was trying to build up to, which is, here's the problem with foreknowledge, because you don't just have God foreknowing things, you have God foredoing things. Go back to Romans chapter 8, right? Those whom God foreknew, he also predestined. So God's responsible for the outcomes here. Well, guess what? This goes to the point that you were getting at, Jay, about what is grace. Al said, we'll go back to the whole idea about remnant. How do you get this remnant in the first place? Elijah complains and says to God, they killed all your prophets and I'm the only one left. And what does God say? No. I kept a remnant for myself, which means if there's 7,000 prophets that did not bow the knee to Baal, this God was able to keep them from doing so, which means he was also able to keep the other ones from doing so, but he didn't. He says, I have kept a remnant for myself. So you would think, oh, the 7,000 that did not bow the knee to Baal, kudos to them, right? Praise to them. They did a good job. They did a meritorious work by not bowing the knee to Baal and only serving Yahweh. But now Paul ruins that. Paul says, no, God is the one who kept them from bowing that knee. He kept a remnant for himself. So you can't even say that there was a work done on their part to not bow to Baal. Yeah. That's all Yahweh's doing. Well, so too, this gets to the point that Jabet's trying to make. Even this remnant, if they're a work of grace and not a work of works, then who can say, like, this goes to the point, is there any meritorious work being done by anyone if even the remnant not bowing is a work of grace, which is what Paul makes it in verse 5.
And now I begin to interrogate his concept of grace. But yes. It looks like Albert has something to say.
Yeah, no, I think what's interesting here is, we spent a lot of time in the last chapter talking about how Paul has renegotiated with the text of the Old Testament. And I guess it's like when you do that, I mean, it introduces a lot of problems, right? Without, it goes without saying. But I just feel like, like Christians today, they don't understand, or they won't see that when anyone has to renegotiate with anything, right? Whether it's law, whether it's, a pronouncement as someone has made in the past, and then what you're trying to do is you're trying to extract from it. You're essentially trying to save it, right? There's a way to save everything, and that's what happens. I mean, you do that, and then you're all of a sudden you're raising all these new problems that people like us have to address, right? People like, and I think what we might be, thought of as, like a theological enterprise is really just a way to, how should I say? I don't want to say damage control, because I feel like that's not really doing it justice in a way. I think what's happening here is there's a literary renegotiation that has to happen, but then in that process, you're changing the definition of the very things that you're trying to establish. Like, once again, so that's to say, it's like if you're gonna, how should I say? I mean, it's kind of an analogy of what Christians are doing whenever they try to talk about like saving people or saving. I mean, there's something here. There's something here, I think, I'm not articulating it well, but it's just the mere fact that we have to be able to just talk about like what this word means, and like going really down back to the basics of the fundamentals of these ideas. Like now the whole thing is in question. And I think that is that's to say, like it's people people should be angry about this. I guess that's another way to put it. It's like there's no like, oh, this is not just a conceptual exercise that we're doing here. Like, this is actually wrong, like on a very fundamental level.
Wow. So, we can come back to that point, because that's a powerful charge to make.
Yeah.
Especially as atheist, agnostic type folk. Religious people will want to know, where are you even getting the idea of something being wrong from?
Right.
Maybe we can get back to that point later in this episode. I hope we do. That's a powerful charge to make.
Yeah.
Jay Witt, let's talk about, now that we worked through that, grace versus works in verse 6 here.
Yeah. Let's get into grace. So I feel like English speaking and even non-English speaking cultures have been duped. Many of us have bought into Paul's redefinition or renegotiation of what grace what was meant by grace textually. Prior, that is, if we go back to the
I'm wondering if you're about to blow my mind here, because I'm sitting here like, what other definition of grace are you about to hit us with?
Right.
All I know is the Christian one that I've always known. So I'm on the edge of my seat here.
I'm prepared for pushback. But
Okay.
as I was actually reading through this chapter and and pondering on what he was saying, because the passage verse 6 comes to mind again. But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Now already my spidey senses are being kind of activated, because I'm like, this sounds like propaganda.
Yes.
This sounds like a dichotomy he's setting up. He's saying that if it's by grace, it can't be by works. That sounds to me to be a hot link back to earlier principles he taught within Romans, where he's saying that salvation is by. Go ahead.
Well, my issue with that was, I feel like he's contradicting himself, because in those earlier chapters he tried to make it seem like it was always by grace. Remember how he changed Genesis 15 and made Abraham the one who was justified by faith, instead of Abraham justifying God by faith. But the reason why he changed Genesis 15 to do that was to try to make it seem like it was always by faith. Well, no.
Yeah,
Because he's saying it was always by faith. That's not the same as saying it was always by grace. Now he said, okay, I'm wrong. Saying it was always by faith is not the same.
No. I don't think you're entirely off here, though, because there is a tethering of faith to grace that he makes. Like faith is grace is the prerequisite to the faith. Like the faith is a result of the grace that is subsequent to it. Right. So he said hopefully this isn't a task for the listening audience to hear through, because there's a lot going through. I'm trying to make sure that I'm efficiently setting the table. But what's going on here is he has taught that salvation, like our soteriology, is a work of grace, and that even the faith is a work of that grace, and the faith is a necessary component of that salvation, right? So here he gets straight to the point. He's trying to, he's established a paradigm whereby the Christian receives everything they have by grace. Why? It was just so necessary in order to make his argument that the Gentiles don't need to be circumcised. So that's where this is all stemming from. This is all stemming from a Gentile-friendly gospel that Paul is preaching. It's not just about just circumcision. It's about all of the legal requirements. Because he's an evangelist to, or missionary to Gentiles, he needed a Gentile-friendly gospel. And he found ways to manipulate the text to create this. But he also found a paradigm that he's now using to explain everything. And that paradigm is the paradigm by which everything that comes to God's people comes to them via grace. And so that, I wish you kept that passage. I'll pull it up here.
No, I can put it back up.
Yeah. Because I was looking at it, but if it's too much trouble, I'll just
here it comes.
So, wait till I see that. Okay, so here he says, but if it's by grace, it is no longer work. So here he's intending you to start dichotomizing or making an antithesis between works and grace. And this is pointing back to what he's spoken about earlier. And I'm going to question that. He says, otherwise, now this is where the real problem begins. Otherwise, grace would no longer be grace. So what he's saying is, if works played a role in this, it couldn't be grace. And many reformers say that grace is so free and so sovereign that if God was compelled to extend it to you because of some sort of merit within you, it would necessarily no longer be definitionally grace. What I am challenging is that idea. I'm going to do it without taking us on. I don't want to run us into all of the Old Testament passages, but what I did do is I went to the Septuagint to see how it uses various passages about grace. And I tried to make sure that, because, you know, a word could be interpreted favor, grace, but in a Septuagint, it's not the same word. You get what I'm saying? So if it's not the same word that Paul's using here, then I can't use it to make my argument, even if in English it's the same word.
Gotcha.
So what I did is I found Genesis 6. I think it's Genesis 6:8. I think, let me see if I can pull that up. Genesis 6:8.
You're about to open the door, I can tell. I've already got thoughts bubbling, but go ahead.
Okay, let's see. Okay. And this is the English Standard Version. It says, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And actually, let me read a little before that, just so you get the context. Because when it says but, it's implying something else. So in Genesis 6:7, he says, so the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry. We talked about this in our exit strategy. He repented that he had made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, right? That same passage is used. So that, and in the Greek, that's I think it's charis, which is it's the same word he's using here. Let me hurry up and run here.
So are you going to talk about how? Are you going to talk about what the term means in that passage?
Yeah, there are several passages where grace is you. So let's just take that passage for instance. There are passages where it speaks of God's grace coming to individuals, and the question is this person a person of a certain kind of character prior to that?
Your question, if I could,
so fine.
Are you basically saying, was there something meritorious about Noah that caused him to find favor? Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now I understand.
And man, I hope I didn't close all of the passages.
Well, and hold on, and can we answer that? Like, what would you say, Al? Al, what would you say? Was there something meritorious about Noah that caused him to find favor, or is it a meritless favor, like Paul seems to be saying in Romans 11?
So I have to. My Bible knowledge is rusty, but
okay.
But my gut is telling me no, or I should say, no. It wasn't based on unmeritorious. Like there was something about Noah.
And what's making your gut say that? Because I think I know why Jay Witt is saying it's not meritless, but what's making your gut say that?
It's because I remember certain prophets of the Old Testament saying, being attributed to being, how should I say, just the fact that they were quote unquote righteous or
right. And Jay Witt, is that what you're? Right. Are you going off of the idea that Noah was righteous among his generation or blameless among his generation? Is that what's making you say?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
It makes me think of, man, I wish I had all of the tools laid out for me right now. But in Genesis 18:3, I have a very good notion that where he says, where I think this is Abram who says this one. He said, Lord, if indeed I have found grace in thy sight, pass not by thy servant. Right? If I'm not mistaken, because when you say found grace, now the question is if Charis is in question here, and he's saying if I found that in your sight, is he saying what do you mean? What does it mean if I found unmerited favor in your sight? In other words, if you're favorable toward me, if I've done something. What you're seeing, I think, in a lot of these passages are people who are being presented as exemplars in terms of their morality, in terms of the way they behave, and they are not, like, for instance, I think of the passage where Abram is arguing for Lot.
I was just in here thinking about that. I was just sitting here thinking about that.
Go ahead. I don't want to. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
like,
ahead.
if, you're the judge of all the earth. Won't you do right? If you
Yeah,
find 50 righteous men in the city, would you spare it for
there you
50? Would you
go.
spare it
There
for
you
10? Would you
go.
spare it? That's not a meritless favor. That's if you
Yes,
find people who are meritorious, would you spare the rest of the city
yes,
for the sake of those? Not being able to find any,
yes.
God didn't spare the city at all. So there was no grace. Why? Because there was no one meritorious.
Yeah, yeah. And if he would have found someone, that person would have found favor.
Right.
That person would have found grace. Because at that point he would say, all right, I will graciously make a way of escape. I will save the city or preserve it.
But there would be others who would be beneficiaries of that person's merit. If you spare the city for the sake of that, 10 or 50 or whatever, so they could be said to receive unmeritorious favor, but the 10 or the 50, they're getting basically what the righteous deserve. They deserve to be spared.
Yes, there's a passage where it talks about God resisting the proud, but giving grace to the humble.
Right. So the humble in that case, right? The humble in that case are meriting the grace that they're getting.
Yep. I'm going to see if I can find that grace there and see if it also is cherished there. And if it is, it's the same word Paul's using in this passage. That's it's not. It doesn't necessarily mean that the same word has, because we know in English
there could be a semantic range, basically.
Ways.
Yeah, semantic range.
Yes. Yeah, but I would dare say that we have enough examples of grace being used this way. It's like he gives grace to the humble, but he resists the proud. So what is the meritorious quality that entitles a person to such a grace?
Well, the Christian could say the humble person is the person who's so low that they know they don't deserve grace.
Yeah,
and so God gives it to
them. Not that they could. They say that.
Right.
They actually say that, right?
Okay.
So I'm just presenting this just so, and unless we get really bogged down, this might be worthy of people kind of Googling on their own and stuff, but just understand what he's presenting us with here as a matter of fact. And this is interesting because, how would I say, because charlatans often will present you an innovation as though it was something that always existed. So just think of a Trump speech where he'll cite something that's a total revelation. It's never been said ever before, but he says it with the confidence as though it's always existed. So just think of that when you're looking at Romans 11 and seeing how Paul is presenting the concept of grace. He's saying, well, it couldn't be of works, because if it was of that, it would negate it being of grace. And you're like, wait a second. The Lord resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. But Noah found grace, and do I have to read your interpretation, your definition of what grace is into that, or does it more naturally lend itself to a different definition? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So he can lead you to, it's sort of like he can provide you with a legend or a new dictionary, so that whenever you see certain, and this is what he's doing in this book, in various, that's why I don't think this is, somebody might say this is a specious argument. This argument doesn't have real merit to it. But it's not like we haven't seen him doing that for 10 chapters.
Yeah.
We've seen him presenting us with different equivocation, renegotiating the definition of words that we already know the definition of, and now we have to accept your new definition. So now when I see it, I have your legend. And so when I see that, I say, oh, that's Christ, or that's grace, or that's, and it's like, no, that's not what grace meant until you said it meant this. Like, you saying it meant this has now become the thing that has redefined the way we look at what grace was. You see what I mean? I don't want to overstate this.
Do you guys remember in the earlier chapters, we were trying to figure out what Paul meant by flesh?
Yeah.
Like what, you know what I mean? And it's that like confusion that he's like bringing into this word now in a way
Hmm.
too. Like it's this kind of like he's trying so hard to figure out how to bring Gentiles into into the remnant,
Hmm.
that he is almost mystifying a word
Hmm.
in a way. I don't know. That's it's a feeling I get that
Yeah.
Paul is
That's
doing.
something that I'm going to have to think about now. I'm going to want to go back
Yeah.
and look at, man, has grace always been unmerited favor? That's something I'm going to have to pay attention to now. Um, Great, Jay, but thank you for even
Yeah,
yeah, causing us to look at that more than,
yeah.
because I just read right past it, like, oh yeah, the grace I've always interpreted as. It was a very
But
Pauline.
I think the telltale sign here, it's like almost like the shibboleth here, the thing that reveals it to be what it is in this sense, um, or what I believe is revealing it to be, is that it's so married to his soteriology and his other concepts of the meritlessness, or not by works, his kind of dichotomization of works and grace here mirrors his dichotomization of works and faith. And
That's
it's
the point
such
I
a
was going to try to get
clean,
back to. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, it's such a clean bifurcation and antithesis that I can't see it being true in a sense,
Mm,
based on the way I know he uses the same sort of bifurcation earlier in the book. You see what I mean?
right.
Like if he hadn't set a precedent for being deceptive with these
Mm.
antitheses, I
Mhm.
wouldn't
You
see
wouldn't have paid
this and
attention to
immediately
it.
think
Yeah.
that, yeah, I wouldn't have thought, oh, maybe he's redefining grace here. But now having disproved and seen the way
Mm.
he's been a sort of kind of slimy person with the way
The
he
scales
did
are
it
falling
works
from your
against faith.
eyes, and now you can
Yes,
see.
I
Well,
see the light. I see
two
the light.
things. Two things I think. One, you guys correct me if I'm wrong. I don't recall the gospel authors putting the word grace in Jesus's mouth very often, if at all.
I don't remember one
Mhm.
instance. Yeah. I
Mhm.
don't recall one instance.
Which further goes to Jaywitt's point about, are you, Paul, doing something with this
It's an innovation.
with this term, this concept, this ideology that was not being done before you introduced it? Whoever the gospel
Mhm.
authors were, if they are tracing remnants of a real Jesus, none of them recall him introducing this idea of grace.
So I
Yeah.
wonder if it's a bit of a oversight. No, no, that's the wrong word. Because the commandment to go into all the world and preach everything I've commanded you. I mean, though that wasn't in Mark, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not the first synoptic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's almost like Jesus didn't like he was very, in fact, Israel centric. He
Mm-hmm.
was not thinking about
Right.
there was no problem for him to solve in
Mm-hmm.
that way. And then I guess it's with the
Mhm.
destruction of the temple, then all of a sudden
Yeah.
they inserted the last the ending there,
Hmm.
go into all the world,
Yeah.
because there's no more Jerusalem to
Well, but
save, I guess, whatever.
it's the foreknowledge of God,
Hmm.
because you're trying to protect your God's sovereignty. You
Right.
have to make every bad thing that happens to you something that your God foreknew, and something that he not only did he foreknow, he ordained. Well, there's no foreordained. He ordained it to happen such that even if you look bad temporarily, your God never looks bad. And as Jay would said at the beginning, you're going to look like a winner in the future because your God only has you in this losing position to set you up for a win later on. Even if you have to incorporate Gentiles into that win, because
Mm.
how else are you going to get that win? Because look at how powerful these Gentiles continue to be. First, it's
Mhm.
Mesopotamia, then it's Persia, then it's Greece, then it's Rome. The Gentiles continue to be in power. We've got to find a way to make our God, make the Gentiles' power part of our God's plan. And so, yeah, Al, to your point,
Mhm.
Yeah.
um, this is something that you have to do to protect God's foreknowledge.
Yeah.
I think it was Al who pointed out earlier on one of our episodes in Romans how Paul likes to do this antithetical kind of presentation. Like he's always giving you a clean this or that. That's part of his. It's like almost like a dualistic kind of presentation of everything. Everything is sort of boom, boom. It's bifurcated, or I should say, not dualistic. I meant binary. It's a binary presentation of everything. So, so here the clear binary is works, grace, and it parallels works, faith. And this is the paradigm that he uses to work out his good news message to the Gentiles, which is what this ultimately is. But now he's using it to try to make sense of what's going on with Israel. Yeah. So he's saying, basically, he's saying, even if most of the Israelites have been are not buying into this message, it further proves my point, because now the remnant that does believe it is a remnant that is chosen by grace. And this proves my point that, not my point, I'm saying Paul is saying this proves his point, is you're going to be saved as a result of his grace and not as a result of what you've done. And so it makes sense that there will be a remnant. Look, there's a precedent.
But remember what we said, in order for a lie to work, there's got to be a little bit of truth in it. And Paul, here's where I think he does a little bit of double speak and doesn't realize, if I said, he juxtaposed works to grace here, but earlier he juxtaposed works to faith. Here's where he messes up, because when he juxtaposed works to faith, he tried to make it seem like it was never about works. It was always about faith. But here in verse 6, he lets the cat out the bag. He slips and says it is no longer on the basis of works.
Come on.
So
there we go.
This undoes. You got to get your detective magnifying glass out and this undoes the point that you were making about faith. It at some point, it wasn't about faith. It was about works. You just said,
The only way he could have kept this in mind is if he had a chalkboard with everything in clear categories. So this is almost like a Freudian slip or something.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's amazing. That's crazy.
He's like, it's no longer work. Wait a second. It was never about works. What do you mean?
You can see the student. You can see the student raising the hand in the class. Excuse me, professor. You just said it's no longer about works, but a minute you said it was always about faith and never about works.
Let's pursue that. Let's pursue that for a second, though. When he says no longer on the basis of works, right? Let's pursue that.
Oh my gosh.
How could he make that right? How could he make that, harmonize that with what he's told us previously, just for the Christian who would try to do that? Or how could you interpret? How could that be interpreted? Because to me, the clear meaning of no longer, you only would word a thing that way if at some point it was.
Exactly.
Yes. So what other way can we interpret that?
Give us a second. Let's think. Maybe audience, you think too.
Yeah, right now this is blowing my mind. This is really blowing my mind that you pointed this out, Brady. Oh my gosh.
How could you justify that it once was about works, even though he's saying it? Go back. I forget which chapter. Somewhere in between chapters 3 through 5, and then jumps back into it in chapter, I think, 8. He makes the point that it was never about works, that it was always about faith. This is why he uses Abraham and changes the meaning of Genesis.
That's in Romans 1, because he says from first to last. He says, let me see, Romans 1. I'm trying to think. That's where he revealed. I'm just thinking. It'll be better just to look at it. Romans 1. Because he says it's the same from first to last. Let's see. Salvation.
I'm thinking about what I would say as a Christian as to how I would get out of this.
Right.
Okay. Yes. Here it is. It's in here it is in for it's written. Okay, for when I share the gospel for power of God, salvation, for it's written. Okay, no, that's not it.
Are you talking about chapter 2 when he says righteousness that's revealed from faith to faith?
Might be it. It might be
I think that's chapter 2,
which is a different which was a different translation, which somebody might be able to say, well, that's not what that was going on there.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I guess I would say, from a Christian, was it ever about works?
I mean, in the garden.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Well, no,
because even in the garden, what were they supposed to do? Based on the evangelical understanding of the garden story, they were supposed to believe God. So is that a work, or is faith a work in that sense?
That's not even, well, a lot of Reformed people wouldn't even say that was the covenant of works. They wouldn't even say that counted as the covenant of works, because they were.
Yeah, that's correct.
I don't know if that applies to them, because they weren't technically in need of a salvation either. Remember?
True.
It's pre-lapsarian, so it's not like, I mean, everything that.
Well, it's pre-lapsarian, but it was technically that there was still that potentiality to fall, quote unquote.
And it was how they would merit eternal life.
Right.
They would merit eternal life by believing what God said about.
By believing what God said, right?
About the tree.
Yeah.
Believing and obeying.
No, I think I'd have to push back on that, because death was supposed to have been introduced into the scene via sin. So they would have already had life eternal.
No. Because remember, we talked about this in several episodes. Paul says death comes into the world through sin, but in Genesis, it looks like they were not immortal.
I'm not arguing with a realistic reading of the text. I'm arguing with the evangelical. So yeah, I get what you're saying. Okay. I agree with you on that. But I'm saying the evangelical cannot argue that, because according to Paul, death gets introduced because of sin. So they already had life.
But now think about this, though.
They weren't trying to merit salvation because they weren't fallen yet.
Very many times the Christian presents the gospel as, under the Old Testament, under the Old Covenant, it was by works, but God knew that they were not going to be able to produce those works. And so God always had an ace in the hole. God always was planning to introduce.
But they didn't have an ability. They wouldn't have had an ability.
No.
Because they didn't have a corrupted nature.
I'm off of Adam and Eve. I'm talking about Israel. I'm going back to how would the Christian justify Paul saying it's no longer by works? And I think I would have said God had two plans of salvation. He had the law, so that was by works, but he knew that wasn't going to work. He knew that salvation by works wasn't going to work. And so he had the sacrificial system. But I still would not have introduced faith into Israel's practice. I would have introduced the sacrificial system, but I would not have necessarily introduced grace and faith into it. I guess the sacrifices would have been grace, but I still don't know how faith would have played into it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
For all that this excursus has offered to the listener, hopefully, at least for me, it was a total rabbit hole to look at the passages where Job is singled out as being a righteous man, and Abram find, all these people who I put on the, if you go to a movie that's in 3D, you have to put on certain glasses to see the 3D. Well, there's a sense in which the text, the New Testament writers think that you need their New Testament 3D glasses to read these passages. That might not appear. So the person without the glasses, they don't see this. Yeah. As soon as you have Paul's his interpretive lens, quite literally, on, you can go then to these passages where people are receiving grace, who are obviously of a different character than the people around them. Where the text seems to be implying that the grace is resultant from, a certain kind of merit that they have. Yeah. And you take it and you actually put the cart in front of the horse, and you say that grace is what gave them the change of character. Because Paul has told you that that's the only way they have a different kind of character is as a result of grace. Yeah. And all I'm challenging the listener to do is not necessarily reject that, but see if you can read it without Paul's. That's basically the challenge. Can you read it and it makes sense without Paul's 3D glasses on? And then why would you feel you need his 3D glasses to read it another way? That's the question.
Yeah. That's the Christian project, is constructing those 3D glasses to read the Old Testament in a way that's favorable to a Gentile Jewish religion. I'm not even going to go back to the Old Testament passages I want to, because I think we've done enough to make the point. So we can now just breeze through the rest of this.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
What then? Israel failed to obtain what it sought. The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened. As it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that should not see and ears that should not hear, down to this very day. As David says, let their table become a snare and a trap, a pitfall and a retribution for them. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see, and bend their backs forever. I'll just say, the first passage that he talks about here, God gave them a spirit of stupor. I think it's Isaiah 42 or Isaiah 29. There's several passages that he's tying in together there. He kind of is, for the very first time in Romans, Paul is sort of talking about Israel in context, where God is talking about Israel and not Gentiles at this point in the Old Testament.
Paul, if I'm not mistaken, quotes that same passage from Isaiah in the book of Acts, which makes me think, I'm no Bible scholar in the sense of knowing all of the history of these, when things were written, but I wonder if Acts was written after Romans, because the author of Acts puts this quotation into Paul's mouth. I think he was already in prison by that point. And earlier in the Areopagus in Acts 17, he's making certain statements that seem to find parallels in Romans 1, etc. So it almost seems as though the writer of Acts, I know the Christian would say, well, no, he's writing about a historical figure with ideas, but it just, it seems to me that it's a possibility.
I could see that. Verse 8, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that they should not see, ears so that they should not hear. It is talking about Israel in those passages in Isaiah. It's not talking about Israel being blinded and deafened so that the Gentiles could be saved. It's talking about Israel being blinded and deafened as the Gentiles are coming in to plunder them and judge them. God's going to keep them sort of like, God's going to make it so that they can't repent, so that this judgment can happen. Paul changes the context to make it, God's going to make Israel unable to see what's going on so that God can save the Gentiles. So that sort of is a little twist that Paul is putting on. Those are the 3D glasses that Paul wants to use here.
Can I read you guys a quick passage real fast?
Yep.
This is Acts 28:23. When they had appointed a day for him, they came to him at his lodging in great numbers. From morning till evening, he expounded to them, they're talking about Paul, testifying to the kingdom of God and trying to convince them about Jesus, both from the law of Moses and from the prophets. And some were convinced by what he said, but others disbelieved. And disagreeing among themselves, they departed after Paul had made one statement. The Holy Spirit was right in saying to your fathers through Isaiah the prophet, go to this people and say, you will indeed hear but not understand, and will indeed see but not perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. And then 28, he says, therefore, let it be known to you that this salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen. So it's kind of, that's what I was referring to. In Acts 28 is the last chapter.
Great parallel. It really does show. It's almost, I could see an ancient Israelite, not ancient. I could see a first century Israelite seeing what Paul is doing and almost like no, too far. Like we wrote these ideological passages in our scriptures to explain why the Gentiles could rule over us and our God not be defeated. That's what we were doing.
I see somebody else saying, let him cook, and the other guy's grabbing his coat jacket. No, man, you gotta stop now. Let him cook.
It's like, hold on, Paul, hold on. Don't take the ideology that far. Don't make it so that the Gentiles now are part of you're doing too much, Paul. It's almost like
he's like, no, I gotta get this off my chest.
Imagine two siblings, two brothers. They go to a new school and they start getting bullied, right? And the bully's taking the kids' lunch money and all that. And then one of the brothers says, "That's okay. The only reason why you're able to beat me up and take my money is because my parents wanted you to have lunch anyway, because they knew you couldn't afford your lunch. So they gave me lunch money knowing that you was going to beat me up and take it." Now, it's like, okay, that's a weird ideology. That's a weird way to explain why I was able to beat you up and take your lunch money, but okay. Right. But then 3 weeks go by and it's still happening. And the other kid says, okay, my turn. Let me make up a story. Only reason why you was able to beat us up for a month straight was because my parents really is going to adopt you to make you one of us. And so after they adopt you, they're going to pay for your, they're going to pay for your college. They're going to pay for your, but if you're an adopted child and my parents are willing to do that for you, how much more are they going to give me, the family business, when the time comes? So even if you beat me up my entire high school life, it's only because my parents wanted you to, and they got better plans for me. You're an adopted child and you get my lunch money. Guess what? I'm going to get a car.
So come on home with us.
And the other brother's like, no, like we didn't promise them all that. Like now you got them coming to our house. Now you're doing too much.
Too much.
Yeah.
But as you get further in this chapter, as you get further in it, go ahead, Joe.
No, that's what I'm saying. Let him cook. Tell him to come home with us.
But as you get further in this chapter, you're going to see that that's sort of what Paul is doing with the whole Jew and Gentile thing. Like he's making it too good for the Gentiles. He's making them an offer they can't refuse. And you can see other Jews saying, you're giving away the kingdom. You're giving away too much.
But he feels like it's a negotiation he had to make in order to make sense of earlier things that they're suffering did with their book. Yeah. So this is the logical outworking of just how he's presented things. Yeah. All right. So verse 11, we're going to see this analogy worked out in Paul's language here. So I ask, have they, meaning the Jews, stumbled so as to fall? By no means. But through their trespass, salvation comes to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? Now I'm speaking to you Gentiles. Inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry in order to make my fellow Jews jealous, and thus save some of them. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? If our parents are willing to adopt y'all and give y'all lunch money, imagine what they're willing to do for us. This is what Paul's argument is here. Yeah, he's using his classic, his go-to a fortiori argument. Yeah. If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. If the root is holy, so are the branches. I'm going to keep reading unless you guys have any commentary. Keep on reading.
But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, a wild olive shoot, were grafted in their place to share the riches of the olive tree, do not boast. So this is the younger brother telling the bullies, don't boast just because y'all beating us up and taking our stuff. right? Our parents are just being kind to you. They're really just trying to make us jealous. Verse 18, do not boast over the branches. If you do boast, remember it is not you that support the root, but the root that supports you. You will say, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. Verse 20, that is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief, but you stand fast only through faith. So do not become proud, but stand in awe. For if God did not spare the natural branches, if God was willing to spank Israel, Gentiles, don't you be coming in here all proud. He could spank y'all too. Neither will he spare you. Verse 22. Note then the kindness and severity of God, severity toward those who have fallen, but kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And even the others, if they do not persist,
swings both ways.
Yeah, and even the others,
gives himself out. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No. Explain what you mean there.
I'm saying this is when people tell you to pray for somebody and they're like, well, either way, God's will is going to be done. It's like, all right, what the hell am I praying for? You know, like
Right.
It's just either they're going to give God the glory for either result.
Right.
It's like,
right.
He's like, well, if you persevere, then, you know, that's his kindness. It's like, it's the double-edged sword, you know? It's like, even a single-edged sword is a double-edged sword.
Sword is a double-edged sword.
It works.
If you all don't persevere, you guys can be cut back off. And if they do come to belief, they'll be grafted in. Either way, our God's going to win. So, however we spin this story.
Either way, he's up to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Verse 23, and even the others, if they do not persist in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God has the power to graft them in again. This is just madness.
Yeah.
For if you
so if they leave somehow, and then they can actually come back and get grafted in, so it's like it literally is a revolving door. It's like, whichever way it comes, you know.
Yeah. And any generation that seems to be coming near to this will say, oh, they're the ones that believed and were grafted in. If they fall away, oh, they're the ones that were grafted out. This is why I believe the Holocaust was used as a way to sort of justify like this. That's what you all get. Y'all rejected Jesus. You'll say things like that, and you'll try to make that proof of this ideology here.
Yeah.
So that whatever happens in history, you're going to find a way to make it so that regardless, our God wins.
But just know that what Paul is saying here is that history is going to happen, which you kind of don't need somebody to tell you. This is a lot of words that you don't need someone to. Things are going to happen.
Exactly.
That's what he's saying. It could go this way. It could go that way. You know, and come November, you know, Trump could win. Kamala could win. All right. Yes, that's what an election is. That's what it means to just be alive when an election is happening, you know?
Well, part of my deconversion was realizing things are going to happen. What am I doing sitting here trying to find ways to justify or glorify God or demonize or villainize myself, or maybe even give myself credit. This happened because I was faithful. This happened because, but even if I was faithful, I was only faithful because God was. I said, damn, you know what? And I literally tested this theory. I'm going to just live my life. I'm going to live my life, however, and I'm going to see, do blessings still fall? Am I any more blessed? Am I any more burdened if I stop praying, if I just live my damn life? And you know what? Things continue to happen. Good things, yes. Bad things, yes. Things I could explain, yes. Things I couldn't explain, yes. And no God necessary. Now they say no batteries needed, right? No God needed. Things continue to happen. And when I saw that year after year after year, I said, damn, things just happen. I don't need ideology anymore. I don't need ideology anymore.
The book of Job is a huge ideology, and they hyperbolize horrible events for that very purpose. Like, it's unbelievably bad. In fact, it didn't happen. Like the tornado, like all of his offspring happened to be partying in a house, and a tornado happens to come through. And this is in the book. And while they're partying, so because you have to have all of his offspring killed at the same time. So what is it? They're at a party at one of their houses. Then a tornado comes and kills all of them. So he loses all of his kids. He's got physical sickness. This is how far they've gone with the ideology. It's unbelievably a bad story because it's just so unrealistic. Every possible thing goes wrong. His wife is like, you just need to die. His friends are over. And it's like, and at the end of at the beginning of the story, they make it a point to show you that he is righteous, superlatively righteous. That's how they set this ideology up. It's like, if it can happen to him, this isn't a fortiori argument via an ideology. They're saying, if it can happen to this guy, who God himself says to the accuser, to the Satan, he says, have you considered him? He's like, he's killing it. God himself is like, in terms of righteousness, this guy, my man here, and now granted, this does conflict with Paul's definition of faith or grace, man, merit, and all of that kind of thing. Because God, the only way this ideology works is Job has to actually be that guy, righteousness-wise. The reason why it works as an ideology is because there's no reason why any of this should be happening to him. Right? So they set the story up telling you he was killing it so much that God, like, on just an off day, turned to Satan and said, like, yo, have you considered my servant Job? Like, he's out here killing it. And God's response to that, Satan's response to that is, well, of course he's killing it because you set things up in such a way that if he's killing it, he's going to be living this kind of lavish life. But I bet you this, if I take everything he has from him, I bet you if I can take everything this man has, he'll curse you. And so the ideology, the table is set for the ideology. You got a man who is superlatively righteous, and then everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong, in spite of the fact that he's done everything right. And that's why it's an ideology, because it's a story that's to tell you that no matter what is going on in your life, it's not necessarily an indication that God is mad at you, that you've done something wrong. In other words, if you paid your tithes to the temple at the time, if you've done all the right things, if you haven't cheated on your wife and all of this stuff, and you raised your kids in obedience to Torah, and then you still get the bad end of the stick, you have some sort of, at the end of the book, God doesn't even give him an answer. He's like, were you there when I set the foundation? Go ahead. I'm talking in all people. Go ahead.
It's Job is an ideology for when ideologies fail.
Exactly. That's still so good. So good. So good.
That's really good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're going to set all these stories up to explain life to you in a way that makes it make sense. But when those stories fail, just know there's a story for that.
There's a story.
Yeah, there's a story for that. Like, if you did everything right, and then it still isn't going right, look, at the end of the day, he doesn't even give him an answer. He just says, where were you? Who are you to question me? And this is, interestingly enough, let's bring it back to Romans. Paul does the same thing in Romans 9.
Yeah.
When the buck starts to, like, when the rubber meets the road and his foot is to the fire and it's like, okay, I've been following your argument. Now answer this question. He's like, I'm not answering that. You got to go somewhere else for that. Like, who are you? Who do you think? Like a mob boss? Get this guy out of here. Who do you think you are? Get this guy out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Who do you think you are to ask me, the big boss, a question?
But it defeats the purpose, though. Why write the entire book if I can't ask you any questions? Why write the entire Old Testament if at the end of the day I just got to accept whatever I have to, you're going to do what you're going to do. The pot can't say to the pot, why'd you? Then why write all these stories, all these ideologies, if you've got an ideology telling me why these ideologies don't work? Just leave me the fuck alone.
Don't need to work. That's our answer to Paul. You slam the door on the Jehovah's Witness who's coming to you to try. Like, get the fuck out of here, man. I'm going on with my life. Leave me alone. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
All right, let's finish this up
You
here.
know, I think what it shows us is that the ideologies don't work. And if the ideologies don't work, the religion doesn't work. If you need an ideology to explain away your ideologies, then what that means is the system is down. It doesn't work, right? Like if the power went out and then the backup generator doesn't work, then I don't have power. I just have to accept that this whole system is not going to
think about those jobs, right? You go to work and everything is so computer, like you need computers for everything, that if the internet goes down, they just say, you know what, you guys go home. The system is down. Go home. There's nothing you can do here today. The system is down.
Yeah, there's nothing.
That ends up being what happens when the ideologies don't work. The system is down. Then why am I here? That's why I left religion. The system is down.
Yep.
You know, I go ahead, DeWitt. Finish that.
No, I've gone on enough.
So I think I'm, I've been a little quiet for the last 20 minutes or so. I think more than usual in a way, because I think part of why I almost ignored a lot of these problems as a Christian is, you pick up on things, right? Over that, or, like you sort of think about like, well, what does Paul really mean here or there? Because it just doesn't feel like it all adds up. There's an intuition about it. And I think part of it is, for me, like I think when I think about certain problems or traumatic memories, I have a tendency to dissociate from it. And I think for maybe a lot of Christians out there, they kind of experience maybe a similar type of dissociation when it comes to these kinds of problems. And you still, like, it's a defense mechanism, right? Like even I wonder, even in Job's case, like in the story of the Job ideology, it's almost like that is a way to kind of instill more of a sense of dissociation, because it's such a terrible story. And so I wonder, that is to say, I wonder if my deconversion would have happened sooner if I learned how to work through that dissociation. That's something that is, and I think that's a topic that we haven't discussed much, actually.
Yeah. When you say defense mechanism, do you mean like protecting yourself from having your idea of reality and reality clash?
Correct. And it's your own it's a skill that certain people have. And I think not everyone can do that. It's something that I can do. And it's like a biological defense mechanism for the inadequacies of the ideological explanations that we've been presented with.
Yeah.
I think that there might be something there to that. Yeah.
Let's try to get out of this book real quick, and then I want to try to come back to the statement Al made about what Paul is doing is wrong.
Okay.
Hopefully we can get back to that.
Good stuff, Aldo.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, so wrapping it up here, we're going to come to when I was a Christian, this was one of my favorite passages in the entire Bible. All right, verse 25 here. Lest you be wise in your own conceits, I want you to understand. He's talking to Gentiles now. I want you to understand this mystery, brethren. A hardening has come upon part of Israel until the full number of Gentiles come in. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob, and this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. I'm sure we haven't got to the verse that was my favorite when I was a believer yet. But I imagine we could spend a lot of time talking about the ideology. And I love the fact that we're saying the word ideology so much in this episode, because I hope everybody goes and researches not just the term, but examples and cases of etiology. Because once you get that in your system, you will never look at the Bible the same. You will never look at when you look at every page, you realize this is all etiology. You will never look at it the same. But he says, a hardening has come upon part of Israel until the full number of the Gentiles come in. Once that happens, all Israel will be saved. I have two questions. One, do you get the impression that Paul is talking about something that's going to happen within his lifetime? Mm-hmm. Like for him to say all Israel will be saved, he cannot have meant 40 generations from now, once the full number of Gentiles have come in, all Israel will be saved, because you've got generations of people who've lived and died not having a chance to believe because the full number of Gentiles hadn't come in yet. Paul has to be thinking about something that's going to happen in his lifetime. This
more imminently, at least.
Well, not just at least. I'm not even going to, I'll argue with that. To say at least is to leave room for something beyond his lifetime. You can't say with definitive confidence that all Israel will be saved once the full number of Gentiles comes in if you're talking about something beyond your lifetime. You can't do that, because once you're talking about past this generation, you now have Israelites not being saved because they're not part of this generation. How can all Israel be saved if you're talking about future generations of Israelites? You've got to be talking about something that you expect to happen while you guys are alive in this generation, I think.
Plus, the temple hadn't been destroyed yet, right?
Correct.
That's kind of the context here.
Correct.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Agree or disagree with that? My other point would be, well, no. If you disagree with what I'm saying, and you say once the full number of Gentiles comes in, could be any number of future generations, this again is terrible etiology, because how do you delimit what the full number of Gentiles is? How could you ever know when that is? You could say that ad infinitum. And you could, once again, that's the back door. That's the out that Jay talked about. You've got to give yourself an out. When will this happen? When the full number of Gentiles come in. When will that be? Who knows? The full number of Gentiles could be somewhere in the year 6039. You never know. It's unfalsifiable.
But there also just seems, I mean, I think it's safe to say that this is false. I mean, you're going to have to spiritualize this or be a preterist or whatever the hell, because you know for a fact, if you could even identify, because after 8070, it became increasingly harder to identify certain tribes and stuff. If you could even identify them, I mean, there are definitely not, there are plenty of people who say they are of that heritage who are not. They have a very robust tradition that's going on right now that has no intention on, even you have secular Jews that consider themselves to be Jews, and they're basically atheists and so forth. So this is like, this is insane. This is like, I think it's very self-evidently not true, is what I'm saying. Like whatever he's trying to predict happening here, we can say it didn't happen. We know it hasn't happened. And I can say based on current trends,
it's not going to happen.
What do we, it's not going to happen. Like you can project out, like you can just see where certain trends are leading and know that this isn't going to happen. Without some sort of, I don't know, some sort of Copernican turn of events where they somehow, I mean, sheesh, they've got millennia of worth of scholarship within their own tradition at this point. You got scholarship of Jews in the Middle Ages, like very robust theological scholarship. I mean, like there are people invested in training Judaistically. You understand what I'm saying? Like they have communities that have so much they have just as much investment in their religion as Christians have in their religion. The amount that it would take to undo that basically he's predicting the end of Judaism.
or the salvation, the salvation of Judaism.
Salvation, you're right.
Well,
all Israel will be saved.
I'm saying the end of the religion of Judaism, because if according to his soteriology here, they're going to all be saved. They're going to become part of the Christian body.
What don't you think? I mean, what's come before this is the fact that more Gentiles have joined the church rather than Jews, right? I mean, just by sheer numbers, even at this point. I mean, like he's done a terrible job, I think, convincing any Jews coming over to this. I mean, are you kidding me? Like Jesus being crucified is the Messiah. I mean, it's like that was already an offense. So it's like, yeah. So that is to say, yeah, I think you're right, and I think there is like this is him trying to figure out.
Well, let's do what Jay let's do what Jay Witt tried to do a minute ago when he asked us to try to figure out how could you save Paul from the it's no longer by works. Let's see how could you save Paul.
Right.
He says, and so all Israel will be saved. How could you save Paul here? Because either he's lying or a false prophet, or he's just flat out wrong, or he's right. How could he possibly be right?
I don't think you can make him right, because
I have a way. I have a way.
Go ahead.
No, but I want to see what you guys can't think of any way to make him right. Come on, you guys you're reformed. You have to think of at least one way.
we were reformed.
I refuse to offer their apologies given the way he's spoken so far. Like he's made such a very clear distinction between Israel and Gentiles that I can't spiritualize Israel at this point. Because
but I think you have to. The Westminster.
No. See, that's dishonesty. That's dishonesty.
But hold on. But would you agree though? Because they do it in other contexts, but I think they would have to do it here too. The Westminster response to this. Let me just say it for the listener. The Westminster response to this is Christ is true Israel.
Yeah.
So Israel is not the people. Israel is Jesus Christ. He is the Israel of God, right? Isn't there a passage that calls him the Israel of God? So all Israel will be saved. You could kind of finagle it to make it Christ as true Israel. And in that sense, of course, Paul's right here. And everybody who's in Christ. Israel?
Yeah, I can't believe you're even tolerating presenting that.
I mean, so I don't subscribe to the Westminster Confession anymore. But the best possible read that I can see, once again, Paul believed in, right, within his lifetime, he would see Jesus return and all be raised from the dead, and Israel would be restored to its rightful place in a way. So basically they're gathering all the Jews as much as they can through all the tribes, and then they're trying to graft in these Gentiles. So as the Israelite numbers are dwindling, or as the Jewish people are dwindling in terms of, I guess, keeping them in or trying to proselytize as much as he can to as many Jews out there, he's going to graft in as many Gentiles as he can, and then hopefully Jesus would return and would establish the kingdom, or restore the kingdom from exile and defeat Rome, and who knows, right? So that to me makes the most sense given what I know now. That's all I'm going to say. Yeah.
I just wanted to go to the scripture because I'm trying to think, where do they get the Christ as true Israel? Galatians 6:16, 14 says,
one inwardly?
No, that's a different passage, which may be worth looking up. But Galatians 6:14 through 16. But far be it from me to glory except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by which the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. For neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creation. Peace and mercy be upon all who walk by this rule, upon the Israel of God. So that's not even the context that I thought it was. Where do they get Christ as true Israel from?
I was thinking of Romans 2, because that we dealt with that earlier in Romans. He does Jewish one, but that still doesn't make sense with this. None of that makes sense. He's not talking about Christ. I just refuse to spend too much time on presenting this as Christ. That's just a ridiculous apologetic. I mean, at no point in this chapter has he been dealing at all with the person of Christ or union with Christ or anything. He's been dealing specifically with, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and he's talking about a group of people who've been cut off so that others could be branched in. So he's not talking about Jesus Christ there.
Yeah, he's talking about ethnicities here.
Right.
And it doesn't make any sense to try to to do that is to lie to people.
Yeah.
To try to make this something other than what he's saying. Now, when you read what he's saying they're all, and I've heard pastors sort of befuddled and not knowing what to make of, so all Israel will be saved. Well, that's because it's not true. like this is one of the reasons why we know the Bible. See, verse 26 of chapter 11 here is one of the reasons why you know the Bible is not true, or at least the book of Romans, for that matter. You can know it's not true because he makes a prediction of something that has not occurred and that basically cannot occur.
Well, you could go a no true Scotsman with this, because earlier in the book he did make the case, I think in chapter 9, that not all who come from Abraham is Israel. So you could say, well, then when I say all Israel will be saved, I mean all saved Israelites will be saved. Only true Israelites will be saved.
Yeah.
Anybody who doesn't get saved, they were never true Israel. Because all that come through Abraham's body are not Abraham's children.
The only problem with that explanation is it's just really stupid, because what's the point of all of this argument and putting all this stuff
Well, once again, it's an ideology for when your ideologies don't work. So the point of all this, I got you. Yeah.
There's a lot of argument that he's making, and he's talking about very specific groups of people. If you're just going to, at the end, say those who are saved, in other words, it's possible that he's saying that. But if that's what he's saying, it's just like what we spoke about earlier, when it's like, well, history is going to happen. It might go that way. It might go that way. If this is just like the quote unquote double-edged sword thing again, where it's like, all right, even a single-edged sword is a double. All right, then sure. But what's the point of the entire argument if that's what you're saying? If you're saying he's going to save who he's going to save, you could have said that in one sentence and we could have gone on with our Sunday. But to present us with this and that and that and that, and then at the end, all of Israel will be saved, and you're saying, well, what he's saying there is that everybody he's going to save is going to be saved. Then that doesn't make any sense. That's why I'm saying it's stupid. It's because we just spent the whole, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got a super chat from SG. A $10 super chat says, "So glad I've been saved from caring about this stuff anymore." Thank you, SG.
This is the last chapter of this for us.
Amen to that.
This is our last chapter.
Indeed. And show SG some love. That is my sister.
Yes, sir.
By blood and not the blood of Christ. Let's finish this here. Verse 28. As regards the gospel, talking about Jews, talking to Gentiles about Jews, as regards the gospel, they are enemies of God for your sake. But as regards election, they are beloved for the sake of their forefathers. For the gift and the call of God are irrevocable. Just as you were once disobedient to God, but now have received mercy because of their disobedience, so they have now been disobedient, in order that by the mercy shown to you, they also may receive mercy. Now here goes, this is why I say God's to blame. Verse 32, for God has consigned all men over to disobedience, or God has consigned all men to disobedience, that he may have mercy upon all. So the Jews were disobedient so that the Gentiles could get mercy. And now God's going to use God's going to use their disobedience to bring the Gentiles in, but now he's also going to use mercy to bring the Jews back in. Who is responsible for all this? None of it is by works, but guess what? Not only is salvation not by works, neither is damnation by works. God is the one who determined that people would be disobedient. He consigned all men over to disobedience. So you can't take credit for the good you did. You can't even take credit for the bad you did. You were consigned over to disobedience. Why? So that God could have mercy on all. He is chess piecing this whole thing, making the people who do wrong do wrong. He's consigned them to disobedience. You do something meritorious, God did that. You do something that is demeritorious, God did that. Why?
Yeah.
So he could have mercy on all.
The thing that is paramount in his scheme is his freedom to show mercy, which, according to Paul, which is some sort of synonym to grace, would not be mercy if it was compelled by anything else. So understand that central to Paul's understanding here in verse 32 of his understanding informs why he has to set it up this way, because he feels like grace or mercy has to be utterly free. It can't be something that is tethered to or tied down by human beings' merit. And so in order for it to be the case, he has to empty human beings of any merit. And they have to be consistently in a state of disobedience and lacking any kind of, so that he is free in that situation to now give mercy. So ultimately, the freedom of God or his sovereignty in the situation is the most important thing that Paul sees. And it's because in his eyes, a sovereign God is the only way that this ideology can be guaranteed. The only way he can have a guarantee that this ideology works is that God has to be sovereign over all elements, so that at no point when you look around and you're saying, well, things are not going the way you told me, can you look up and say, well, God's not at work? Because you have to be able to constantly be able to say, well, even the bad stuff is him.
Yeah.
The bad and the good. And it kind of legitimizes the ideology. Otherwise, so you see his sovereignty is subordinate to the ideology. Like basically the sovereignty is like kind of like that.
Yeah.
I need to think about that. His sovereignty is subordinate to the ideology. Basically what you're saying is the story demands it, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yes. It's
like,
the handmaiden of the ideology. It's the way he makes it work.
Yeah.
You know,
I remember
go ahead.
I was going to say, I remember when Justin Sledge, when he talked about the history of the theology where Yahweh became the God of all, and he apparently claimed that was a theological problem that Jews had, that all of a sudden, oh wait, what? He's the God of all? That means he's the God of evil. What is that? What are you trying to say? So that really, that problem started at the conception of, when that monotheistic push, during the exilic period became a reality. But that's interesting, Jay, because when you actually, if you're going to subscribe God as being all, his allness becomes subordinate to the problems that arise with everything else.
Like he necessarily has to then be in control of them.
Yeah,
but that's only resultant from your previous understanding that that things are going to work out in a certain kind of way. So you can make predictions. Of course, the predictions are made in such a vague way we can never know if they ever came true. But when you make those predictions, he's the puppet master behind it. Right. Or like in Clash of the Titans, the gods moving the chess pieces on the board, and then the people on the planet carrying it. he has to be that in order for you to be able to look back and say, all right, well, he did promise that no matter what is happening, even if it looks like the Jews radically reject Christ, he did promise that he's going to save him. So we just have to somehow believe that in their rejecting Christ, it's actually a door being opened for just like in the Acts 28 passage that I read, where Paul's like, well, basically I'm going to turn to the Gentiles because like you guys are rejected. So like now there's a practical reason why he's there, because that's the only place that his message is really working. But then he takes that and works it. He's, well, yeah, that makes sense because God is actually sovereignly using them rejecting my message so that I can now extend it.
Well, this is Romans 9.
You guys, yeah.
But Romans 9, right? You have to harden Pharaoh's heart. Why? Because if you're setting this thing up to free your people, you can't have a free willing Pharaoh changing his mind in the middle of your program. So you've got to harden his heart. You got to fashion the pot the way you want it, and you've got to harden it so that it can't change while you're doing what you're doing. So because you're self-soothing, this goes back to the dear God, teardrop, 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 amen. Because you're self-soothing and the teardrops that you're crying is the story of a sovereign God, you have to put all these attributes on this sovereign God. You've got to give him foreknowledge. You've got to give him predestination. You've got to give him sovereignty. You've got to put all these things on him. But in doing that, you now make him responsible for obedience and disobedience, good and evil.
It's literally Drake saying to the audience, hey, I fed Kendrick the lies.
Right.
Remember?
Right. Yeah.
Like, so was it in Euphoria? Like, I think it's Euphoria, right? Like,
I don't know what song
reveals
it was.
all of this. He reveals, no, it was something in LA, such in, I think it was that. It was that. It was one of the songs where the cover of the song had a photo from Drake's camp, which meant that there was somebody who was leaking information to Kendrick. And what ends up, so Drake was clearly, it was like he had a gut punch. He was taken out with this. And he totally had no clue what was happening. And he was blindsided. And Drake's ideology was, oh, I planted that. I fed him misinformation so he would, but it wasn't misinformation. Like anybody who knows anything about this beef will know what I'm talking about. This man dropped bars on stuff that he couldn't have known without somebody in Drake's camp having fed it to Kendrick. And so Drake, just like the writers here in an ideology, in order to try to like, it's like, what is the angle I can take to get out? Oh, I can say I did that on purpose. Like I fed him the misinformation, so that he would write the song that was exposing me as a drug addict and all this kind of other stuff.
But even if you take that route and let's say it works, you still now become responsible for all that happens as a result of that. So now you've got Yahweh.
You're a drug addict.
Right.
It's like, okay, it's like, bro, why would you reveal to us that you're this like depraved drug addict type person or all these other failures that you did? Like, why? He's like, yeah, I fed the misinformation because I wanted a media firestorm to cannibalize me. Like, that's what I wanted. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. And so when we hear him say that, we're like, no, you didn't, Drake. This is cap. You actually didn't feed anything. That's what we're asking you to do with the text. Right. When the text is telling you, nah, he actually set this up on purpose. It's like, no, how does it make sense?
So you know what? You know what the beauty about this is? Right now you have apologists defending the Christian faith and counter apologists attacking things like the historicity of the Israelite conquest of Canaan, right? So you got all these counter apologists showing it cannot have happened when the Bible says it happened, the destruction of Ai, the destruction of Jericho, all these things, it cannot have happened the way or when the Bible says, which means it's probably false. Then you got Christians saying, no, because if you look at it like this, and if you and if you put it in this century, it can have happened the way the Bible says. So it is true. And the counter apologists are like, the counter apologists are just sitting there waiting for them to take the bait. You say, oh, wait. So you're saying these things did happen? And the Christian's like, yes, it happened, just like the Bible said. Oh, so God did tell them to go in and kill the babies and so it's like, wait, if your God really did do these things, then he's a moral monster. Either he's a liar because these things didn't happen, or they did happen and he's a moral monster. Which is it?
Yeah. John's baptism, was it of man or of God? Like,
right.
Like either way, you're going to get stoned to death. Like, go ahead.
and then you get Freudian slips by Paul by saying, right? No, it is no longer on the basis of works.
It's no longer on the basis of works. Yeah. Oh, my bad. My
bad. So I always use this analogy. You when you play somebody in Connect Four, right? There's certain moves you can make where you're like, I got you both ways. If you're super skillful or lucky, you might have the person 3 different ways.
Right.
I never forget when I was working through why I don't believe this anymore. I was like, damn, the science destroys it. Wait, the ancient Near Eastern comparative religions and ancient myths,
3-way Connect Four
that destroys it. It was like no matter what the contradictions within the text itself, I was like, no matter which way I go, this destroys Christianity. And so
this reminds me when I was in college. When I was in college, there was used to have Connect Four tournaments. And at one point, it was a brother who was in a similar state to what you just described. Mm-hmm. He got so mad, he just got up, just destroyed the whole. He just turned the whole table over.
You know when somebody has you both ways or has you 3 ways, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. And I remember feeling I said, there's nothing I can do. The game is over. No matter which way I turn.
You got to get up and throw the table over. You got to just get up and just destroy the whole match. Just like, I'm done. This is hilarious because it brought me right back to being in that room with them. And the other guy was talking a lot of junk to him while he was talking so much. The guy just got up frustrated and just destroyed the whole table. That's what you did with the faith. Yeah, that's what.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing. I'll pause a little bit because I'm trying to give Alex space. Alex going to jump in, but I don't want to overspeak him. But I remember, like, when you're watching those kind of tournaments, it's one thing when the person who got somebody both ways knows it. You see the confidence in them. The person who doesn't see it yet, they're still strategizing. They're trying to figure out what they could do to win, but they don't know. But the people watching it, they know. And they're like, yo, he got it. He got like that's how the skeptic, the atheist, the non-believing community is looking at the Bible and Christians still trying to defend it. They're like, the person who's still believing, they don't know yet. We who are watching are like, no matter what you do, the game is over.
Brilliant analogy. That Connect Four thing is brilliant because whenever I tell believers because they always think it's a single thing, and I was like, maybe if it was a single thing, I could have held on.
Yeah, but
it's like the great cloud of witnesses is what got me. from the book of Hebrews. Having this great cloud of witness. It was like, if it was just one, but in the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established, brother. Like I got the science here, like you said, I got this over here. It's like, bro, I'm holding on by a shoestring to this faith at this point,
Yeah.
It's kind of wild being on the other side, right? I mean, it's just being able to identify with that crowd and being able to, it's wild. It's pretty wild. A
crowd that you would have never saw yourself being a part of.
No, never, ever. And it's funny because I'll say this quick thing because I know we're running over, but it's, when I converse with some of my old Christian friends, I mean, they haven't really given me anything. Like it's you know what they tend to kind of lean back on? They'll just kind of, not even like a specific dogma per se, but they'll just lean back on saying that, this is precisely like it's almost like they're making claims. They're just like reiterating claims about, their faith or
personal experience.
Your personal experience. Yeah, that too, or things like that. Yeah. So it's rough. I kind of feel bad. I feel bad because I've been there. We've all been there, right?
Yeah.
But it's like it's like I don't want it's tricky. It's tricky for me to navigate being on the other side. So
well, here's part of what that other side is. We'll close on this. This was my favorite passage of scripture.
Yeah, you have memorized this too?
Yep, I had it memorized. I used to sign it when I used to sign CDs. There's two things I used to sign. I would sign Fanatic, and then I would either sign 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 9 to 10, or I would sign Romans 11, verses 33 through 36. And I knew it by heart. But think about this. Yeah. We just went through the whole Connect Four, got you both ways, got you 3 ways. We see the holes in all the arguments. Paul doesn't. Paul sets it up, and here's what he has to say about what he just put forward.
Yeah.
His response is, oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable are his ways. Now, we just scrutinized his ways. Paul is saying his ways are inscrutable. No, you could literally scrutinize the ways of the God that Paul is articulating to you here. Paul says, how unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable are his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Apparently, the real question is, who has known the mind of Paul? Because this is you spinning yarn here. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, or who has given to him a gift that he might be repaid? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Teardrop, teardrop, teardrop. Amen.
Okay. That's
so basically, beautiful. He leaves you with a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
It's a cliffhanger. You know, he takes you on this story, and at some point you're like, all right, you're waiting for him to tie things up neatly, and he's like, and he says, okay, show's over, folks. show's over, folks. Let's draw the curtains. Yeah.
But in his mind, though, this is such a great schema. God's going to consign all over to disobedience. He's going to use the disobedience of Jews to save the Gentiles. Then he's going to have mercy on the Gentiles. Then he's going to have mercy on the Jews and graft them back in. And Paul says, look at this. Look at the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. And who could have ever fathomed this? Apparently, only you, Paul. Only you could have fathomed this.
Yeah.
He did a terrible job communicating it.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's like looking at a thing. We have a tendency when we don't understand this. You know, here's a great analogy. Terrence Howard was able to go on Joe Rogan and use words in ways that didn't make sense or misuse them. And there was a certain segment of the population that, because they didn't understand it, it was wise because they couldn't.
That's a great analogy.
And there's always a certain percentage of people who, if you use terminology that's, you know, in a way, if you're an obscurantist, if you use arcane terminology
or an English accent,
in a way, yes, in English, anything that, this brings us full circle back to how we opened up. If you use old English that's sufficiently old enough where it kind of obscures the meaning of the thing that's being said. So you function very much as an obscurantist, right? There is a certain percentage of humanity that will immediately imagine that it must be really wise. And that's the same percentage of the population that when they heard Terrence using, he was talking gibberish. Like the scientists who actually knew the words that he was mispronouncing, they were like, he's not making any sense here.
Right.
But there was a segment of the population that had no knowledge of the words, the context, or anything. And just because it was being spoken over their head and they couldn't make sense of it, they were like, this guy is a genius.
Let him cook.
In a similar way.
That's that's the tetrahedron. And everybody's like, oh my God.
Yep. In a similar way, Paul made total hash of any kind of semblance of a plan at all. Anybody looking at what we just read through in this last chapter, there is no cohesion. There is no kind of clear, logical kind of form. And what it has led Paul to he's among those who would look at Terrence Howard and say he's a genius. Instead, the Terrence Howard here is Yahweh or God. And in this case, a total incoherence has resulted in him worshiping like people worship Terrence Howard. Oh, he's a genius. How inscrutable. Well, it's inscrutable because it's extremely stupid. And
well, hold on to your point.
Extremely incoherent.
I know we're trying to get out of here, but I didn't do this, but we could have. In chapters 1 and 2, we talked about Paul with this asymmetrical, reasoning that he would put up. We just skipped over one that is very apparent when he says God uses the disobedience of the Jews to bring in the Gentiles, to have mercy on the Gentiles. But then it almost makes it seem like, okay, so then you're going to say he's going to use the disobedience of the Gentiles to bring in the Jews, right? But he doesn't do that. He does some other kind of reasoning. If God's able to use the disobedience of the Jews to have mercy on the Gentiles, he also is going to use he says something that's completely asymmetrical, and you read it like, okay, I guess, but that's not that's not the kind of, like, the motif you were setting up doesn't make any sense.
Right. Doesn't make any sense, no.
Let me just read it real quick, because it's almost like when you hear it, if you just think about it. I can
probably read it. Where are you at? Where are you at?
Verses.
The disobedient, okay.
20 verse 30 and 31.
30 and 31. Okay, so just as you were once disobedient to God, but now have received mercy because of their disobedience, so they have now been disobedient in order that by the mercy shown to you, they also may receive mercy.
What?
God has consigned.
No, that's it. Like, just look at verse 31 doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yes,
verse 30 makes you think he's going to say one thing, but then he flips it and says something completely nonsensical.
Oh, exactly. So there's no symmetry there. Right? yeah. So the Terrence Howard-esque gibberish that led people like Albert, Brady, and myself to me, I should say, led us to reject it as being just nonsense. And that same thing led others to say he's a genius. This same scheme that Paul's submitting here leads us to scratch our heads, and it leads Paul to utter verses 33 through 36. He finds himself, the depths of the wisdom of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable. That's where he's at. It doesn't make sense, and he knows it doesn't, but he's sort of
I don't know that he knows it doesn't make sense. I think he really is feeling himself here.
I think so too. Yeah.
Well, part of me saying him knowing it doesn't make sense. Without dragging this thing on anymore.
Okay, right.
Is to say he knows that it's a very convoluted scheme here. That's what I mean when I say this. So that was shorthand for him saying he knows this is like really convoluted, and it doesn't seem like the most efficient way to achieve. But for him, somehow that marks wisdom. Somehow that he's meritorious of worship as a result of this. And for us, we look at it and we say, well, this seems like it's not true, for one, and it also seems like what happens when people do things. It doesn't seem like there's an actual plan at work here.
Yeah,
it seems like an ideology, like people trying to explain away. You know what I mean? Like he's trying to, because the salvation was supposed to come to the Jews, and then when their salvation comes, the Jews reject it. So then it's like, okay, he's come up with an explanation for how this salvation is being rejected by the Jews, even though it was supposed to come for them.
It just occurred to me, Jaywood, that you're saying all this is that Paul, being Hellenistic, he's like trying to subvert the logic, thinking that it's of a divine, you know what I mean? It's like he's thinking maybe that's part of his thing. It's like he's coming to you thinking like you're going to get something logical, and then he like rhetorically changes it and makes it asymmetrical or weirdly lopsided, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, that's how you make it feel like it's beyond your understanding, maybe in some sense. You know what I mean? It's like it's weird.
This is the equivalent of laughing at your own joke.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes you laugh at your own joke because it's just that funny, and it engenders the audience to laugh too. Other times you laugh at your own joke because no one else is going to do it. But when you do it, they almost feel like, oh, that's where we're supposed to laugh. So when Paul breaks into this praise in verse 33, Oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom. When I read that as a believer, young believer, I too was like, oh, okay, this was the wisdom part. This was okay, let me go marvel at it and let me find it as awe-inspiring as you just did. And I bought into it. And the person who's watching, go ahead.
Back in the day on talk shows, they would have people with sort of cue cards that was the applause goes here.
Right.
So it's almost like their whole, like Paul's like saying, like, you see what I just did? And he holds up the card, like, this is where you're supposed to be worshiping. Only it's total silence for the three of us. We're sitting here looking at them as crickets. It's just like literal crickets.
Yeah. Got a super chat from David DeBow, $5 super chat. Thank you for that, Sid.
Thank you, David.
Okay, gotta give Jay Witt his flowers for that one. Which one? What did he say? What we don't know. What point
I think it was his comment on Romans 1. Right. What was the comment you said exactly? Romans 1.
We're not going to be able to chase it.
So today,
go ahead.
Today I was I probably blew a gasket today going.
Did you cut out, Jay Witt?
Yeah, you still there?
No, I'm just being quiet. No, because I have nothing. I'm just saying it seems today this pod should be studied just so we can reuse some of these analogies.
He said
because
it's good you said analogy because he said it was the Terrence Howard analogy.
Terrence Howard analogy.
That's what he
yes. Yeah. Brady dropped the checkers. Was it the
Connect Four?
Mm-hmm. We got to use that. That's going to be useful later. There's been so many
we need to start making some shorts of these episodes, and that's definitely going to be one of the first shorts that I try to grab.
Yeah. Didn't we say we should solicit the audience member or something to chop some of these up for us? Or
if anybody has time and talent and is willing to help chop some shorts, to get some shorts ready for us to post, we would appreciate that help for sure. You can inbox.
We also need a TikTok, right? But are you willing to let somebody else to crowdsource that or no?
I don't know. I need to think about that.
Yeah.
I need to think about that.
Right.
Okay.
But at least shorts for YouTube. At least shorts for YouTube. Inbox me either here or on Facebook. This has been 2.5 hours of good choppage. Good choppage. Appreciate you guys rocking with us. I hope this was very helpful for you all. Please drop a note, drop a comment to let us know what you found insightful, what you found helpful, what may have been challenging, what you agree, disagree with, or just drop a comment for the sake of the algorithm. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe. We definitely need those. We're trying to get our subscriptions up. We haven't done a campaign in a while. We've been at the 3,800 mark for a good while. We should do some kind of campaign soon, but until then, this was great, fellas.
Unheavenly hosts.
Oh, talk to us. What's going on?
Yes, Unheavenly Hosts. We got a new Albert. Do you think we should reveal what the movie is, or we should make it a surprise?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, let's reveal it.
We've decided that many of the films will be like kind of highbrow, artistic and stuff, but occasionally we're going to keep a rhythm of just lowbrow, just nonsense. So this one is actually left behind. We're in the process of working on a go ahead, Albert. You talk.
Yeah, no, and for those wondering, it's going to be the Nick Cage version of Left Behind.
Wow.
And we're gonna have some fun with this one.
Okay, so are you guys gonna do a live, or you guys are gonna do a premiere?
I don't know.
Maybe I don't know yet.
What do you think? Maybe, what are you suggesting? You're going to come along? You're going to come on board?
No, I was saying if you do a recorded and a premiere, we could just advertise it on this channel too, so that everybody can go watch the premiere together. Because I think that'd be a fun one for people to watch together. But if you guys want to do a live too, we could also promote that. Either way, I just think that'd be a fun one for us to watch you guys take apart.
Oh, well, maybe you could put that in what you do, like some sort of question on YouTube and get people's feedback. So maybe you could throw that in there for them.
No, I'd rather you guys just decide what you want to do, and then whatever you do, we'll be there. I think we'll show up. Yeah.
Okay.
In any case, subscribe to the channel if you guys are interested in that kind of thing, and we'll see you guys.
Much love, y'all. Peace.
All right.